Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Tuesday. Tonight, who is in the way?
Why won't he get out of the way and accept our plan by passing the Canadian Sovereignty Act today?
We are telling Mr. Poilievre, get out of the way, free your MPs.
The Liberals say the Conservatives are obstructing the government's agenda in Parliament, while the Tories blame the Liberals for holding up progress on getting big projects built. Government House Leader Steve McKinnon will join me live on the show in moments. Then, he said.
I'm not sure what the Prime Minister was thinking.
To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the President, I meant what I said in Davos.
Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary claims the Prime Minister walked back his remarks in Davos when speaking to the President. Carney says that isn't true, saying he told Trump he meant what he said. Our front bench is coming up on the He Said. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz will all be here. Plus, will he stay or will he go? Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is facing a major test this week as members of his party get set to vote on whether to keep him at the helm. CTV's pollster of record, Nick Nanos, will be here to break down his latest numbers on the political landscape for Poilievre and both political parties. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show. First, though.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister held a photo op at a grocery store in front of food, but there was just one thing missing. The price tags.
Yesterday, before I had lunch with the Premier of Ontario, I had a long meeting with the Premier of Ontario. I would like to introduce the Leader of the Opposition to the Premier of Ontario so we can learn something about cooperation.
He's had lots of meetings. He's had signing ceremonies. He's had grand announcements and new bureaucracies. But what he hasn't delivered is real results.
We cut taxes for 22 million Canadians. We put in place a national food program for 400,000 kids, making it permanent. Yesterday, we announced a benefit for 12 million Canadians.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre squaring off for the first time this year in the House of Commons. It's the second day of the winter sitting, with the Liberals and Conservatives going head-to-head on affordability. Government House Leader Steve McKinnon says he believes the minority parliament can work, but insists it's the Tories who are holding up bills from passing. Meanwhile, the Conservatives insist the Liberals are the ones who are standing in the way of economic growth. Steve McKinnon, the government's House Leader, is with us live from the House of Commons now. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
It's great to be with you.
I wanted to start off, Minister, with the way in which you're framing this return to the House of Commons, saying in order for your government to move forward on its agenda, the opposition needs to get out of the way. Are you saying that the millions of Canadians who voted for members of the opposition need to get out of the way?
Of course not. What I'm saying is that, for example, to take crime, for example, we have 5 or 6 significant pieces of legislation, Vashi, that deal with things like extortion, child pornography, with online harms coming up, with zones around mosques, churches, synagogues, to create safe zones, to deal with any number of issues around community safety in this country. The Conservatives used to be urging us to deal with these matters. Now they, as you would well know, talk these issues out, whether it be behind me in the House of Commons or in obscure committee rooms. The orders from the Leader's office are pretty plain. It is talk these bills out. It's almost like they don't want us to tackle these problems. It's almost like they don't want to honor their own voters who have urged them and sent them to Ottawa to work on these solutions. So we're asking them, yes, make your suggestions, make your contributions, and then let these things come to a vote. Vote for them, vote against them, up to you. But we want to make sure that we're delivering real results on crime and so many other things for Canadians.
Didn't they just make a deal, though, in the Justice Committee, for example, to press pause on one piece of legislation, looking at one to advance another on bail reform? And doesn't that very fact run counter to what you just spelled out?
Well, very encouraging. That happened just yesterday, and just after I gave the press conference that you just referred to. So we were very, very happy to see Bill C-14, which is a significant advance on bail reform. will be taken up and dealt with by the Justice Committee, and then we'll move to the bill I referred to a moment ago, the safe zones around places of worship.
Is it, I'm wondering about, I guess, the validity of, and I understand in some instances that the opposition, of which you used to be a member of at times, employs tactics to delay the advancement of a government agenda. But you were able to pass so little legislation last year. Is it not kind of ultimately too convenient, very convenient for you to be able to put that at the doorstep of the opposition rather than your own government? And how can you ensure for Canadians watching tonight that you will make every effort possible to not be stuck in the same situation?
Well, I don't want to bore your viewers, Vashi, and I certainly don't want to affect your stellar ratings. But I do want to say this one procedural thing. People don't understand that in the House of Commons, as long as you're talking, standing up, wasting time with debate and leaders' talking points from Mr. Poilievre's office, nothing can come to a vote. So unless you're prepared to invoke closure, for which you also need a majority of the House of Commons, then a bill cannot advance. So the Conservatives have adopted, it's an open secret, I'm sure you're well aware as well, that they will let no bill, even a bill that says the sky is blue, they will let no bill advance because they believe that a good day for them is a day where the government cannot advance on its priorities. That's unfortunate, but that is the toxic environment that Mr. Poilievre has looked to foster, that has some of his MPs, frankly, chafing against. They don't like it. They don't like being handed the talking points. But this is just pure obstruction, Vashi, and we're going to call it out whenever we see it.
You know, I think it's fair to say our viewers are very interested in making sure that democracy is upheld in Parliament, and that a legislative agenda that could benefit them, perhaps or not, is advanced. Should the Conservatives, though, be taking lectures, for example, on what that democracy should look like or how it should be accomplished from a party that, you know, back in 2015 was saying the introduction of omnibus bills under Stephen Harper was an affront to democracy, an affront to the function of Parliament, and now you're employing the Budget Implementation Act to prove your point where the Conservatives are concerned? Should the opposition be taking lectures from your party on upholding parliamentary democracy?
I think Canadians living in Conservative ridings are entitled to take these Conservative MPs at their word. They said they wanted to deal with bail reform. They said they wanted to deal with extortion. In fact, they still get up every day in the House of Commons and ask about some of these criminal justice issues. Well, they have bills right in front of their nose that they can vote on today that offer solutions. And if they believe those solutions are insufficient, then they should offer concrete to you, to others, to Canadians, and certainly to their constituents, what they think an alternative approach would be. They don't do that. They use Mr. Poilievre's very venomous talking points and talk these things out. Again, I don't understand why they view a day of obstruction in the House of Commons as a win for them. I don't think Canadians feel that way. I don't think Canadians watching us from Conservative ridings feel that way. But this is an affliction that has been introduced into the Conservative ranks, and it's something that I know a lot of Canadians are frustrated at.
The Liberals, when they were in opposition, Minister, never employed stalling tactics in order to blunt parts of the government's agenda. Is that seriously what you're saying tonight?
Not in any systematic way, no.
And you believe that this is systematic, despite the fact that
well, you know,
yeah,
I do.
Despite the fact that C5 passed because of the Conservative support, right? Despite the fact that they've now made this agreement to look at bail reform, you still think it's systematic?
Well, look, I do think they are responding, and this is important. You raise an important point. I do think they respond when the public opinion environment is so overwhelmingly behind an idea. For example, yesterday's measures to deal with affordability. For example, getting big major projects done. I think, yes, there are cracks in that armor on their side, if you will, and that's good. And the progress that you mentioned on the bail reform bill yesterday, that's good too. We'll take it when we can get it. We're obviously for all of our bills, and we're going to work to get them advanced. But Canadians who live in conservative ridings are entitled to have members of Parliament who speak their mind, offer suggestions, but at the end of the day, this systematic obstruction is not something that I think serves democracy.
You mentioned the measure that you announced yesterday, and we had Andrew Scheer on the show yesterday as well, who said that if it is exactly as the government has described it and introduced through legislation that way, that the government, as you just said, that the Conservatives rather will support the advancement of that. I did want to ask about sort of the political impetus behind the introduction of that. I know there's a policy imperative, which I'm sure you'll discuss, but I note that both you and the Prime Minister said there's no election in the offing, but the announcement in and of itself seems to run very counter to what Mr. Carney talked about during the Prime Minister talked about during the election campaign. He drew a distinction between his approach to the economic growth and what he criticized the Trudeau government, of which you were a part, their approach to economic growth, which he identified as just through immigration and population growth and government spending. What you announced yesterday is more than $11 billion of additional government spending that nobody from your government has said how you will pay for it. I imagine because you're not introducing a new tax or something to that effect, or described other cuts elsewhere, that it will come from additional borrowing. That runs counter to what Mr. Carney said during the election campaign, what you yourself have said on many instances since then. How are we to infer from that anything other than this is about politics and the possibility of an election?
Well, I don't think Mr. Carney ever ruled out measures to help vulnerable Canadians, and I don't think most Canadians think that helping out the 12 million people who get GST rebates, now grocery and essential goods benefit, will object to that. We saw post-pandemic, Vashi, a spike in food prices, and this is meant to help with that. Inflation largely tamed. That doesn't mean people feel inflation is largely tamed, and that's partly due to things like oranges, coffee, bananas, things where supply chains have been affected, where prices have gone up more than the rate of inflation. The Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, felt strongly that at this point in time where Canadians, many Canadians are struggling with those food prices, that we had an obligation to come in. I don't think that approach has ever been ruled out, but the thing that has not changed is that we know we have to grow the top line in Canada. We have to achieve growth, we have to create jobs, we have to protect the jobs we have that are threatened by trade measures, punitive trade measures coming from south of the border, but we have to create more jobs, we have to build big projects, we have to get things done. We do that every day. We wake up, put on our boots, and try and build big projects and create big opportunities for Canada every day. That we will not waver from.
But respectfully, Minister, the Prime Minister did criticize the former Prime Minister for too much government spending. And he had, food prices were extremely high, 30% higher during the election campaign than they were five years prior. There were no promises made about $11 billion of additional spending. I am not in any way taking away from the very, very specific need, as you outline it, of Canadians. I know it. I hear it every day as well. But this is not exactly what you promised to do during the campaign, add $11 billion extra dollars to a deficit, was it?
Look, what we were elected to do is to be sensitive to the needs of Canadians, many of whom feel anxiety because whether it's threatened trade measures or other things, or whether it's simply increased costs due to food inflation, we're here to help with that. Any responsible government must be here to help with those kinds of pressures. We have an existing mechanism, a tool, already built into the tax system in the form of the GST rebate. It's easy to build upon, and it's easy to justify, in my view, in a world where food inflation, imported food particularly, has seen supply-related shocks. and which means that food has increased more than the overall CPI. That is something that we've been giving a lot of thought to over the last few years. They're giving a lot of thought to that, by the way, in the UK, throughout Europe, and Mr. Trump is giving a lot of thought. You hear him talk about affordability. Japan going through significant cost pressures on that. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is our response to that.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. I'm out of time. Always appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashi.
That's Government House Leader Steve McKinnon. Our front bench will be here a little bit later on to talk about the return of Parliament, as well as Pierre Poilievre's leadership review, which is, of course, slated for later this week. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levins will be here for that discussion. First, though, where do the parties stand in public opinion polling as 2026 gets underway? Nick Nanos is my guest to talk about that after a very short break. Welcome back to Power Play. As the winter sitting of Parliament kicks off and speculation an election isn't impossible this year is abound, where does each party stand with Canadians? Here to break down his latest data is Nick Nanos, Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Vashi.
Good to see you. You were out in the field last week. Let's start with the top line numbers. Where are each of the parties sitting right now?
Well, in the latest Nanos tracking, it's only 4 percentage points between the Liberals and the Conservatives, 39-35. The NDP back at 12. And, you know, that 12 number for the NDP is not good for Pierre Poilievre. He needs the NDP to do better to split that progressive vote. But, you know, you look at the numbers and, you know, the election was close in terms of popular vote. It's still relatively close and competitive.
Moved a lot, right? Those top, like they've stayed pretty close, the two parties, since the election.
Absolutely. It's been a horse race for the last year.
What hasn't remained close are the preferred PM numbers. So tell us where those are at right now. And again, important to note, you were out in the field last week, post Davos.
That's right. So this is after Mark Carney's speech, after Donald Trump's speech, and kind of rolls up the numbers in terms of who Canadians would prefer as Prime Minister. Check out these numbers, Vashi. 53-25, a 28-point advantage for Mark Carney on the preferred Prime Minister front. And, you know, his numbers went up last week coming off of his Davos trip.
Have you seen a spread that wide in recent memory?
Yeah, actually, when Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau were around, Poilievre, and you know that's the kicker here, Vashi. You know, a year ago when Justin Trudeau stepped down, Pierre Poilievre was first as Prime Minister, probably a 15-point advantage, and had a 20-point advantage in the ballot numbers. Fast forward a year later, and one leader has a massive advantage in terms of preferred Prime Minister, but there's no massive advantage for that same party, the Liberals, when it comes to ballot support.
So I find both of these things very fascinating. The fact that the parties can be so close, the Conservative leader can be at such a disadvantage to the Liberal leader, but his party's not losing because of that, and the Liberals aren't gaining because of the advantage Mark Carney has. How do you explain that?
Well, I think what's clear is that people still don't like the Liberals. Why don't we just say it straight out? You know, their leader, Mark Carney, is massively more popular than the Liberal brand, and the political fortunes for that party are firmly around Mark Carney. And for the Conservatives, they just want change. They hate the Liberals. They want the Liberals out of power. And I'm not sure if many Conservative voters care who the leader is, because let's face it, Poilievre trails his party by 10 points, and Carney is ahead of his party in double digits. So there you go.
So let's talk a little bit about the Conservative leadership race, because I know it's a different beast insofar as this is the party itself and members who are delegates, voting delegates who attend, and obviously there's a big portion of the Conservative base that is extremely supportive of Mr. Poilievre. I can't find many people who think he's not going to be able to, you know, get a number that's high enough to retain his leadership. When you look ahead at his leadership, what kinds of things will you be watching for?
Well, first of all, we're going to have to see what the number is, because I think he won the leadership with about 70% of the vote or thereabouts.
I think it was higher.
Higher? Yeah. But, you know, the thing is that the bigger the number for Pierre Poilievre, the better for him. And obviously, he would like to have a big mandate from his own members in order to wage war against Mark Carney. So, you know, I think he would probably hope that he can get 80% support in our leadership vote, and he should get a good number because there's no counterpoint. There's no one in the weeds looking to knife him in the back. There's no alternative to Pierre Poilievre, and whether you like or dislike the guy, he's been working hard. He's been working the phones hard. He's been canvassing with his members. He's been out and mobilizing votes for this leadership vote, which is critical for him.
Just before I let you go, I wanted to ask a little bit about the issue sets that are important to Canadians right now and how they might kind of intersect with the types of announcements we'll be seeing from both the government and the opposition. But in particular this week, we were just talking to Minister McKinnon about the affordability announcement yesterday, aimed at boosting the GST rebate. What are Canadians telling you about what matters to them right now? Well,
it's kind of like a trinity of issues that are driving people's concerns. Jobs in the economy and Donald Trump and inflation. And the thing is what we do know from the polling is that Carney does have the advantage when people are focused on Trump and U.S. relations. And Poilievre has the advantage when the focus is on the cost of living, groceries and stuff like that. And it probably explains what happened this week for the Liberals. Like, let's face it, can their leader do better? I'm not sure. They're only 4 points ahead of the Conservatives. That's probably why the Liberals are trying to get into issues like inflation, the cost of living. But it's going to be tough. Do you know why? Because Pierre Poilievre was ahead of the Liberals on this issue. He has a brand built around this. And, whenever the focus is on the cost of living and inflation, it benefits the Conservatives.
Do the Liberals need to actually own that issue, or do they just need to blunt their vulnerability on it?
I think they need to blunt their vulnerability. They have to be competitive. And you know what? The same thing is true for Pierre Poilievre. He doesn't need to win on Trump and tariffs, but he needs to be more competitive in terms of an alternative vision to show that he is a potential prime minister in waiting.
Okay, Nick, I'll leave it there. Great analysis, as always. Appreciate it. Nick Nanos is the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research. So will Mr. Poilievre be the leader of the Conservatives this time next week? That's the question members of the party will decide as his leadership is put to a vote at the party's annual convention in Calgary. Voting is set to start Friday night at 9:30 Eastern, 7:30 local, following a speech from the Conservative leader. I'll be live in Calgary for special editions of Power Play Thursday and Friday, and we'll have special coverage of Pierre Poilievre's speech for you starting at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain Friday. Coming up on tonight's program, Carney versus Trump. The Prime Minister says he told the U.S. President he meant what he said in Switzerland about an end to the world order as we know it, despite claims from Trump's Treasury Secretary otherwise. Where does that leave the already tense cross-border relationship? Our front bench will be here after a very quick break. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz. Back in a moment.
I was in the Oval with the president today. He spoke to Prime Minister Carney, who was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made at Davos. I'm not sure what the Prime Minister was thinking. Of course, Canada depends on the U.S. There's much more north-south trade than there could ever be east-west trade. He talks about middle countries having to do their own thing. And I'm old enough to remember when French President Francois Mitterrand tried to go down that route. It failed back in the 80s. It'll fail now.
That was U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Fox News saying Prime Minister Mark Carney, quote, very aggressively walked back some remarks he made last week in Davos in a conversation with Donald Trump yesterday. Bessent, as you heard there, says he was in the room when President Trump called the Prime Minister. Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum stressed the end of the rules-based global order and urged middle powers to come together to counter abusive great powers. The Prime Minister confirmed to reporters he did indeed talk to Trump, but dismissed the claim that he backpedaled on the Davos speech.
But to be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. It was clear, it was a broader set of issues that Canada was the first country to understand the change in U.S. trade policy that he had initiated, and we're responding to that. We're responding positively by building partnerships abroad. We're responding positively by building at home, and we're prepared to respond positively by building that new relationship through CUSMA. He understood that, and it was a good conversation, as I say.
So where does that leave things between the neighbouring countries? Let's bring in our front bench, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Dan Moulton is here. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Next to him, Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk joins us remotely. She's former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now principal owner of Monk & Associates. And Stephanie Levitz is here with me in studio. She's a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Stephanie, I'll start with you. Sort of a familiar refrain now. Something gets said from the White House about an interaction with the Prime Minister or the federal government. We learn of it that way, and then the federal government is forced to respond. What do you make of this particular back and forth?
I mean, I go back to, why don't we get readouts of these conversations? I mean, how is it that they happen and we never know they happen until somehow it surfaces elsewhere? As it has been, it seems, throughout this latest go-around or ongoing go-around between our two countries, it's a lot of he said, right? It always seems to be that both parties are saying they said different things and can never arrive at a middle ground. It struck me that maybe they need to go for a pizza like Mark Carney and Doug Ford. and
not a Hawaiian one. You're going to get lots of pushback.
Yeah.
I like it.
But, you can parse the words until you're dead here, Vashti, right? I mean, you could. You could
and we
say,
just might. Yeah.
And we just may.
Yeah.
I mean, the Prime Minister say, well, I said it this way, and Besson has heard it. They've experienced this differently, to borrow a political phrase, and here is where we are. I mean, I guess it's good on balance that the two are speaking, right? On balance that, if we were to believe the Prime Minister that it was Trump that called him, okay, what was the progenitor of that call? Why did that call happen? We don't actually know.
No, we really only know, Dan, what we hear from the White House in the way that they characterize it, and then just a response to that. There's no more kind of fulsome telling of the status of things or where things are at. I think what I would denote is the Prime Minister, in his response today, it wasn't like the video, the ad, the Ronald Reagan ad, where he right away was like, yeah, I apologize. Like he did today, I think, in conjunction with what happened in Davos, appear to take a bit more of a firmer stance in countering the messaging out of the White House.
I think what the Prime Minister said today is what is going to resonate with Canadians, which is that he meant what he said at Davos. And I think if you look at the way he delivered that speech, the context of that speech, I think it resonated with Canadians. And it was very clear that what he was articulating on the world stage was what he's been articulating here in Canada for the better part of the last year, which is that we need to stand up for our own sovereignty, we need to invest in our economy, and we need to do things on our own and along with our allies and partners around the world. I don't think he was walking it back at all, and I'm not sure that Canadians are going to give much credibility to a U.S. administration that's been out there saying that Canada only exists because America says it's okay, and that Canadian soldiers weren't on the front lines in Afghanistan, right? Like, these are some pretty grotesque comments coming out of the White House about Canada just recently and over the course of this president's term in office. And so I'm not sure a lot of credibility is going to be invested in what we're hearing from this secretary or Secretary Lutnick or whoever other spokesperson for the White House is out there trying to besmirch Canada or the Prime Minister. So I understand Stephanie's point about a readout. I think there's some healthy conversation around that. But I'm not sure we can expect every interaction between the president and the prime minister to have a readout. We're going to go through a bumpy road of a renegotiation of a free trade agreement. And I think it's best that they continue to make progress against that and get the best deal for Canada in that process.
I do think Dan's right in Shakir insofar as Canadians not lending a lot of credibility to spokespeople for Donald Trump. I do think, though, at the same time, they wanted to hear they would want to hear from the Prime Minister that what he said in Davos was not just for that audience, that he did mean what he said, because there have been instances over the last 6 months where that wasn't exactly the posture that this world leader or other world leaders were taking to Trump. There does seem to be an evolution there.
Yeah, I mean, you can say the Davos speech was strong, elbows up and whatnot, but I think even just talking about this, it shows a real disconnect between, what's politically important and I think what's important to kind of the business community. Mark Carney is receiving a lot of political points for the speech. Popularity polling is high. A lot of the mainstream media, a lot of the talking heads are supporting this, and that's great. But I think, if you look at the business community, and there was an article in Stephanie's publication talking about, they're cautious. They would prefer that, you don't poke the bear right now. Don't talk negatively about Donald Trump, especially as you lead up to Kuzma. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. I think a lot of folks who have things on the line, who have jobs on the line, would actually prefer none of this public back and forth, kind of rein it in, stop all this public talking, and go back to doing the quiet but hard work of negotiating behind the scenes. I know it's not great for our panels. I know it's not great for the media, but I suspect it's probably the best thing for Canada to not be having this public back and forth with Trump, because frankly, when you get into a war of words with Donald Trump, you usually end up losing. He will say the most outlandish things, and he will just try to actually humiliate and embarrass you, and I'm not sure how that furthers our objectives in our trade negotiations.
I understand that argument, but it feels like, they can't win, like the Prime Minister can't win. Either he's, in a way like Kathleen, not doing elbows up like he promised he would in the election campaign, or he's two elbows up, and now there's backlash to that.
Yeah. I think first of all, let's just start with the fact that, while I agree with Steph that it'd be nice if there were readouts, at least the Prime Minister answered a question on his conversation with Trump, as opposed to kind of...
Should we be rejoicing that he didn't call it boring? Yeah, what a win for us all.
The last few times he's blown off the question or ridiculed journalists for even asking it. So he answered fulsomely, and I thought it was interesting how he tried to reframe actually what he was saying to Donald Trump, which is that, no, Canadians were the first to recognize that Donald Trump was pursuing a different economic agenda. We've adjusted, and now we've encouraged the rest of the world, particularly middle powers, to muscle up, so to speak, to exert their power by, as all the things that Dan just said, spend more on defense, create new economic ties, less dependency on the U.S. And so I think that's what you saw, I think that Carney believes what he said, and Mr. Besant seems to believe what he heard in that room. But I think Carney's framing of it was one that was positive and could actually appeal to those people and those op-eds in the Globe and Mail that are actually asking him not to poke the bear, because he was just actually acknowledging that Trump, you said you've been going on a different economic path, and we're reacting. We're making our moves now. And why Trump called him? Interestingly, certainly if Trump had texted Mr. Carney, I guess we would get a transcript of sorts, because it seems like Mr. Trump has been leaking many of his texts that he has to other world leaders. But I think that potentially, Trump knows that actually Canada is very popular in Americans' eyes. Whether you look at YouGov polls or Ipsos, Angus, they generally show the country of Canada and Canadians generally are quite popular with an American audience. And so poking that bear, especially when, as Carney has gotten so many accolades on the world stage in the last week, maybe doesn't make a lot of sense.
What do you think about that, Steph?
I mean, we've all sort of leaned into this idea that why Donald Trump has been lashing out at Canada over the last week or so is directly related to that Davos speech, right? He didn't like the fact that Mark Carney showed him up. And it all goes back to feelings and not facts. Feelings is where we are with this president. And so have we put this issue to bed? Is it done now, the long spat post-Davos where he's come after us, the China deal, all sorts of, maybe this is okay. They can agree to let's just focus on Kuzma now. I would like to know that. I know people say, oh, why are you so, fixated on the readout? Well, fixated on the readout because we have absolutely no idea what is going on with these negotiations. Exactly. And I think the Canadian public is owed an explanation of that. And I realize that would then in turn require a fulsome readout, a readout with detail, a readout with information. But at least you want to see the ball moving down the field. And it felt like, with Mr. Trump's actions over the last week, it was like, are we even on the field? What is happening here?
We have no idea.
And so again, I go back to, I would have preferred perhaps hearing it, from PMO first rather than on Fox News. But to know that the two men are talking, that at least gives us something. That gives us something that all bets are not off here. And there is a way maybe that this relationship can figure itself out.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. The entire front bench is sticking around. After the break, we're going to turn our attention to the upcoming leadership vote for Pierre Poilievre in Calgary. We're back in just a moment.
why won't he get out of the way and accept our plan by passing the Canadian Sovereignty Act today?
The great territory of Nunavut. I'd like to welcome the Premier of Nunavut is here. One thing we've done in 6 months is agree on Grace Bay Point.
But all the Prime Minister has is meetings, announcements, signing ceremonies, but never shovels in the ground.
The Alberta MOU is not consistent with the Sovereignty Act. The Alberta MOU will build a pipeline.
Back and forth in the House of Commons this afternoon as Prime Minister Mark Carney went head-to-head with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for the first time in 2026. It looked almost the same as how things left off last year, with one noticeable difference. Chris D'Entremont, who resigned from Conservative caucus in November to join the Liberals, crossed the floor, in fact, sitting there. You can see front and center right next to the Prime Minister. The Liberals start the year, of course, too short of a majority, with Carney saying he expects a few by-elections soon. It comes as the Conservative Party of Canada is set to hold its national convention in Calgary starting Thursday, where members will vote on whether Pierre Poilievre should continue as party leader. The front bench is back to take a stab at what will happen. We've got Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Munkin, and Stephanie Levitz here. Shakir, I'll start with you, and we'll start on Mr. Poilievre's leadership test. Tell me exactly what you think is going to happen. Predict it for us if you could.
Listen, he will be the leader after the weekend. Whether the vote starts with an 8, 7, or a 6, he will walk out as a leader. And I'm not really concerned about the actual vote. I'm actually more focused on what happens after this weekend. You're starting to see more of a gradual shift in tone from his response to the Davos letter, giving a bit of kudos to Mark Carney, to even how they were preparing for this week, talking about, you know what, we're willing to work with this government, fast-track legislation, help on Canada-US. I think Pierre trying to soften the party, or at least his image, a little bit. He'll never be the most likable individual. I think there are folks who just have certain views ingrained about who he is. But I think if he can play this role or have this kind of perception of this government in waiting, being very responsible, and not just being obstructionist for the sake of being obstructionist, we'll see how the Canadian electorate kind of takes to that. The one thing I would say, though, with Carney riding high in these polls, I think there's one thing that I've seen no matter what leader you are, no matter what government you are. The longer you are in government, the more disliked you become. And I don't think Mark Carney is immune to that. And I think over time, as Pierre focuses on affordability and Mark Carney spending more time overseas, even though you can say he's doing good work chasing trade deals, just not being in Canada, not prioritizing domestic issues, we'll see how those favorability numbers kind of play out over when a month turns into 2 months, turns into 6 months, turns into a year in power.
Do you think, Dan, it doesn't matter if it's an 8, 7, or 6 ahead of that number? And just for some additional context, like I think more recently of John Rustad in BC, who was able to secure over 70%, but didn't have a huge portion of the party there voting, and it didn't take long for him. I think of Stephen Harper in 2005, who faced a similar leadership review, got nearly 85% of the vote, and went on to win a bunch of elections. Do you think the number matters?
Well, if it doesn't start with an 8, I'll be surprised, frankly, right? I'm shocked to hear Shakir say that if it starts with a 6, it's okay. I think that would be a real surprise. I don't think anyone is talking about Pierre Poilievre facing a serious leadership threat going into the convention this weekend. I suspect that the party faithful that will be showing up in Alberta to cast their ballots are very likely to support his continued leadership, because the members of that party like what they get from him. And I think if Pierre Poilievre was meant to be bringing a different tone to the return of Parliament this week, somebody needs to file a missing persons report, because I haven't seen that. There's absolutely no indication that he intends to change his approach to politics or the kind of tone that he brings to this arena. I honestly am skeptical that we will ever see that. I'm not sure that sort of change in approach for him is likely. I take Shakir's point. There was this interest in some constructive approach at Parliament and making Parliament work, which I think is more about trying to remove the threat of minority Parliament not functioning from the table than anything else. So, no, I think he's got a pretty safe bet at returning a strong result at the convention this weekend, and I'm just not sure that it's going to mean a different Pierre Poilievre or a change in how the vast majority of Canadians feel about his leadership.
I actually think, Kathleen, both what Dan and Shakir are saying is right. Insofar as I would say there's a huge difference through that letter that Mr. Poilievre wrote Mr. Carney, the Prime Minister, over the weekend, and the video, right, that Shakir referenced, where he actually prayed. Like, that is the first time that I can think of, I may be wrong, but that I've heard, like, actual praise for the Prime Minister to kick off the video. But to Dan's point, for example, the questioning in the House of Commons during question period the past few days has been totally the same as, and on track with what we've come to expect from Mr. Poilievre in that venue.
He just can't help himself when he's in that venue. It's just his jousting nature. But I think Shakir makes a good point that the convention, if he can get through it, I agree with him on this one point, that if Poilievre gets through the convention unscathed with a good number, there is an opportunity at that point to set a different tone, to set the tone up for the next election, to change messaging, to pivot a bit, because he has survived that crucial test. But where I disagree with Shakir is on the, it doesn't matter if it's a 6, 7, or 8. I think it really, really fundamentally does matter. And we've seen so many examples throughout history where it matters. I think that Harper at 85 is a good litmus test. But, other people, really respectable conservatives like Ian Brodie, former chief of staff for Stephen Harper, has said that Pierre only needs to hit the mark a percentage point that he achieved when he first won his leadership in September of 2022. Now, Stephanie can correct me on this, but the reporting on that number was somewhere between either 68% and 71%. Is that all he needs? I think he needs more. I'll give you another example. Merritt Stiles, Ontario NDP leader, hit only 68% in a recent leadership review after she lost the winter 2025 election to Doug Ford. And she had to really clean house in terms of how she had to approach after that bruising leadership number. So I think it does have to be higher, high 70s, early 80s at the minimum. But the key thing to remember here is that a secret ballot is a secret ballot. It's unpredictable. And the one thing that's standing out to me is there are more people coming to this convention. All pundits have said no one's going to come to Calgary in the winter. It's going to be horrible. The Ontario Conservative Convention is happening at the same time. No one's going to show up. It looks like from reporting that they're going to bring 4,000 people to this convention. That's 1,000 more than they had at their Quebec City convention. So that's interesting. They seem to be really managing to bring people in. Is that because the organizers behind Pierre want to have some locked-in votes? Anyhow, I'm going to be watching for that number, even if it is only going to come in at midnight on Friday.
Maybe even later. And I will also point out for all of our wonderful viewers in Alberta, it's going to be about 30 degrees warmer in Calgary on Friday than it is going to be in Ottawa. It's like +8. I've been glued to the weather app just in pure excitement after living through this beautiful winter storm here in Ottawa, you can call it. Stephanie, I know you're going to be in Calgary as well. Yeah. What have your conversations been like? Is there anybody on the inside of the Poilievre team that is at all worried about the outcome of this?
They're worried because that's the nature of it, right? I think, as Kathleen points out, a secret ballot is a secret ballot. And, there's that great pothole theory of politics, right? You've made up your mind, you're going to vote a certain way, you are driving to the ballot box, and then you hit a pothole. And then suddenly you're really angry at the government, and you change your vote. The pothole theory in this convention would apply to how these policy resolutions debates go, how the constitutional debates go for the party, which I know to the vast majority of Canadians is kind of like, that's just boring and internal party stuff. But to the people at this convention, those things really matter. And if Mr. Poilievre and his inner circle are seen putting their thumb too much on the scale, for example, interfering too much with the will of the grassroots, will people get annoyed enough? Is that going to sink him, Vashti, on Friday night? I don't think so, but it's the thing that shifts the number. And I think that's part of what we're looking at with this convention. This is Pierre Poilievre's party now. This is not the party of Stephen Harper. It's not even the party of Aaron O'Toole. It belongs to Mr. Poilievre. And so the question becomes, what is he going to do with it? And you would think that those around him right now, every decision they are making right now needs to feed into how do we get that extra 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% to win the next election? Because after this leadership review, the base is with us. And you have to just accept that and move forward. As a conservative said to me earlier today, they have to find a way to sell the second album. Which is that, Pierre...
Ask Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Right? Like, conservatives, in the last few, they didn't give their leaders a second chance. Pierre is going to get a second chance. He has a chance at a second album. How are they going to sell the second album?
Do you see any evidence of the kind of strategy they might employ to sell that second album?
I saw a little bit. I've seen a little bit of it. Excuse me. Like since the House came back, in that they're trying to put up other people. I know that we've all been, noted that their comm strategy since the election, they've put people on your shows, on other shows. I'm seeing that now. I think that's part of that strategy. Looking at the numbers that Nick was talking about in your last segment about the difference between preferred Prime Minister Carney to Pierre, they have to accept. I think as Shakir said that. Pierre's personality is not something everybody is going to respond to, and they're going to have to start positioning this as a government in waiting, not just a prime minister in waiting.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. It'll be an exciting week ahead. Look forward to our analysis next week. Thanks, everybody. Our front bench, we've got Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz. We'll take a quick break. We've got more Power Play on the other end of that break. Welcome back to Power Play. Our takeaway today is all about some of the threats that Donald Trump has recently made against this country and reaction from politicians here to those threats. I want to show you right now a speech that the president is giving in Iowa. It's a speech focused on the economy. So far, we're told he has talked not a whole lot about that, but certainly referenced former President Biden in his remarks and talked a little bit about the U.S. dollar, which I'm also told is responding quite negatively to the comments that the president made about its falling relative value. His comments, the president's comments, come against the backdrop of new data that shows that the economic mood, so level of consumer confidence in the United States, deteriorated in January to the lowest level in more than a decade. That is as measured by the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index. So since 2014, the level has never been as low. The level of confidence in the economy by Americans has never been as low. So I say all that to offer some context to the latest threats made by U.S. President Donald Trump to Canada over the weekend, of course, posting to social media that he was going to apply 100% tariffs to everything coming from Canada if we pursue a free trade agreement with China. Here is Ontario's Premier Doug Ford reacting to that.
I can tell you, folks, we don't have to take a backseat to anyone. We sure the heck don't have to take a backseat to President Trump. We're the #1 customer in the entire world. We buy more products off the U.S. than anyone else in the world, and vice versa. They're our #1 customer, too. And I go back to, what Ronald Reagan said. When you put tariffs on countries, it kills the economy. It has never, ever worked. It never will work. And they're seeing it down in the U.S.
We'll, of course, continue to monitor U.S. President Trump's defense of his economic measures in that speech in Ottawa and share any news with you as it becomes available. I'm going to leave Power Play there. I'm Bashi Capellos. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.